serving as a hospice chaplain in downtown Seattle. I can only imagine, in the middle of the
Yeah.
pandemic. And this was one of the early major areas where the pandemic was like taking footholds, right? I mean, Seattle.
Yeah, we had the dubious honor of the first known case of COVID in America. Certainly, we're now thinking it was already here,
Yeah.
but Seattle, the greater Seattle area, had the first positive known infection and the first outbreak. So we were the first epicenter of it.
Yeah. Welcome to Never Too Late, Real Stories of Reinvention, where I share the stories of dream chasers, career changers, and people who have the courage to reinvent themselves. My name's Eric Cooter, and each episode I sit down with someone who's taken a leap, discovered a new path, or found joy in the unexpected. These are conversations that are about hope and resilience, and hopefully they remind us all that it's never too late to chase your dreams. So today, I'm joined by the Reverend Hillary Kimsey, an Episcopal priest whose vocational path has taken her from Southern Baptist roots, we share that, to the Episcopal Church, we share that, from high school teaching to hospital chaplaincy during the pandemic, oh my gosh, and now to congregational ministry. She's also working on a memoir reflecting on her time as a chaplain in one of Seattle's hospitals during COVID. Hillary, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
So, the great thing about doing a podcast startup is you start out with your friends. It's like you start out with your family, then you start out with your friends, and you ask your friends to give you new people to talk to. And my dear friend Janie Koch, our mutual friend, introduced me to Hillary, and here we are. So, God bless you, Hillary, for being here.
I was so thrilled when she offered to introduce us. So,
oh, how cool! How
glad to be
cool!
here.
Well, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So let's jump in. So I know this is kind of weird for a priest, and we talked about this in the pre-interview interview. Uh, when someone asks you what you do, not what you're doing, but what you do, how do you describe your vocation?
My non-serious answer is always who's asking? And other clergy friends of mine who are single describe trying to figure out what to say on dating profiles about what they do. And thankfully, I'm not in that boat at the moment, so I don't have to figure that out. But my parish priest does a little bit of everything. I have mopped the floors, I've, shoveled the walkway, I've like driven people to and from the hospital. We do a little bit of everything. And
Yeah.
every day is different. If I was to give you a little more serious answer, um, I think of myself as a professional listener, and that has stayed the same from even as a teacher to being a chaplain to being a parish priest. As much talking as I do in those roles, I still think of myself as a professional listener and to others and to the world and to the divine.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think about my time as a parish priest, two different churches, and then my time on bishop staff doing that kind of work, very different. Um, but often we learn more by, I think that's that whole old saying, God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You, you, you learn more about how you can, I think you can be present with people when you listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if we had that in our world today, that people listen more than they, oh, well, anyway, that's another
Yes,
podcast.
absolutely.
Well, so how long have you been a priest now, Hillary?
I was ordained in June of 2020, June 30th of 2020, in a very
Wow.
strange ordination
I,
service. Yeah.
tell us about that. Tell us about that. I know
So
there
it
was
was
there was an event going on in the world during that time, right? What
there was
was
a few things happening in the world. Yeah. So June of 2020 was still in the pre-vaccine era of the pandemic. So there was still lots of caution and masking and social distancing. And King County, where I got ordained, where St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral is where we had the ordination. King County was especially um, strict or conservative in their response to the pandemic, which, as a healthcare professional at the time, I was very grateful for. But it meant that uh, we couldn't have any guests. Like there was no congregation at the
Mm.
service. And
Oh, wow.
so um, one of my colleagues who got ordained with me that day, the Reverend Stephen Crippen, he and I call it the empty tomb, the empty tomb ordination, because St. Mark's is this stone, has all this stone cathedral, and uh, it was just 10 of us. I think
Oh,
there
my
were four
goodness.
hands, the bishop,
Yeah.
the dean of the cathedral, the canon to the ordinary, an organist, a cantor, and a verger. And that was it. 10
Oh, my
people in the whole
gosh.
cathedral. So we
Oh,
vested
my gosh.
ourselves,
Yeah.
that was not a special moment really. Although there was a very funny moment where the canon to the ordinary gathered us all together and she taught us how to flip the chasuble onto ourselves.
Yeah, they don't teach us. Well, they don't teach us that stuff at Sewanee. The chasuble,
So
by the way, for our non-Episcopal listeners, is a holy raincoat. It's
yeah,
actually it's actually a go ahead, go ahead.
like a poncho. It's a hole in the
Poncho.
middle and flip it over your head, but no hood.
Hmm. The holy poncho. I love it. Sounds like a Monty Python movie.
Yeah, so
Wow,
it
that
was a
that was
strange
incredible.
one. Yeah. Very
So
memorable, very grim, but still hopeful at the same time.
yeah, the so and that was in what city again? What city was that?
Seattle, Washington.
Seattle, Washington. Okay, great, 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 great. Yeah, we I was in Southwest Florida during COVID, and then I went to Oklahoma during COVID. And there's nothing like starting a new ministry on diocesan staff in a diocese that's completely, you don't get to visit the churches. It's just
Yeah.
it was interesting. Yeah, and having
Mhm.
Sunday worship. Yeah, that was pretty tough. So wow. So you were ordained during COVID, and so I want to jump into some of your ministry and hospital chaplaincy. Um, but I want to go back just a little bit if I could and think a little bit about you grew up Southern Baptist. I was Methodist, but then we went to the Baptist church. So I got where you're coming from, I think. But I'd like to hear a little bit about what was that experience like for you and how did that influence? I'm just kind of thinking that step from being a Southern Baptist to being an Episcopalian. Can you talk a little bit about that? What it was like growing up in that tradition?
Yes. So what was it like growing up in that tradition? So it was very warm and like lots of, like any good church, we're good at potlucks, right? So
Oh yeah.
lots of my memories early on are of eating and singing and doing things with other children and other students. That was where my peer group was church. And
Mm-hmm.
um so there was this sense of, it certainly was our church family, the social community we were a part of. And um another thing that sort of stands out to me is how much that community taught me to value these scriptures. And
Oh yeah.
uh where we differed as I got older was how to read them and
Yes.
what conclusions we drew. And um, in growing up, I was always taught it was to read the Bible literally
Mm-hmm.
as much as one could,
Yeah.
and in the sense that that taught me to take it very seriously. I'm grateful. I do value them deeply. I love to read them. But I would say, uh, and this is not original to me, someone smarter than me said this first, but we would say now I take the scriptures too seriously to read them literally.
I love that. I'm writing that down. Hang on. I love that. No, I love it because that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. Yes, I don't jump in for just a second. I jumped in because I remember my experience in the Baptist churches. We were taught to memorize
Hmm.
scripture,
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah, it was the sword of the Lord. You had
Hmm.
to. Yeah.
Did Bible drills, find the
Yes.
verses
Yeah.
fastest
First
and
Timothy. Yeah.
memorize.
Yeah. 2 Corinthians 4:7. Blue. And you'd stand up. Yes. Oh my gosh. We went to this.
I did all of that.
I think you, Janie, and I had the same experience growing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And those are the things I'm grateful for
Yeah. Yeah.
as much as I have nowadays. I'm in a tradition that's very different, worship style, very different sort of theology, ecclesiology structure, all that. But I am grateful for the way my upbringing in the Southern Baptist Church taught me to um, value scriptures and to value the community, to
Hmm.
be together frequently. I was at church still usually 3 times a week, and
Yeah.
twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday, sometimes more if there's other stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I knew the children younger than me. I knew their parents. I knew the seniors.
Mhm.
So I knew everybody, and everyone knew
Yeah.
me. I mean, so I remember feeling, in my youngest memories, uh, I love church. It was like my happy place,
Oh yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that stays the same, even though I jumped ship for a different path.
Yeah. Were you youth group Saturday, youth group kind of
Oh
church
yeah,
or
youth group was Sunday night. So I
oh, it's
come
Sunday
back.
night?
The adults would go to, we call it big church. The adults would do worship part two,
Yeah, yeah.
at in the sanctuary, and then we had like a um portable or whatever in the back where the youth group would meet Sunday evenings. And
Yeah.
yeah, every week.
Yep. I sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah.
I know my path took a while. And it was kind of a path of absence for a while
Mhm.
before I finally found the Episcopal Church. But what about you? How did you transition, and can you talk a little bit about that? Or
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think, how can I give you the Cliff Notes version of this? But
We only have an
um
hour. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
yeah, I let's see. The church I grew up in and had a scandal that we won't get into, but
Okay.
the scandal got created a lot of discord, and so people sort of taking sides on whatever was going on. And so as an 18, 19, 20-year old, I was watching this, and I've already graduated the youth group, but I'm still coming back on the weekends from college, and
Mhm.
I'm sort of observing this as a young person. And in your early 20s, you're full of righteous anger at at everybody.
Yeah.
And so I just remember not being that impressed with how some of these adults that I had deep respect for were handling this situation.
Hmm.
And eventually my family stopped going to that particular church. And but all I had ever known was the Baptist church, and particularly the Southern Baptist church. Before college, my understanding of other denominations was really like, oh, they have different music styles, but we all
Right.
believe the same thing because I didn't know any better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'm with you. Yeah.
um, once I went to college, I went to College of Charleston, which is a liberal arts state college in South Carolina, and I studied English and secondary ed. And my friend group was very diverse. And at that point, I'm starting to explore a little bit. I visit other churches once in a while. And early on, I was sort of intrigued. I found myself at Episcopal churches and Lutheran churches more often than not, probably because of the liturgy, but it
Hmm.
felt more accessible than the Catholic Church, which was very new and different for me.
Hmm.
Um, and happening concurrently to this, going through college, sort of doing some exploring, becoming a teacher. I had a friend who was going through cancer treatments. And so, as this is sort of happening around the same timeline, um, and he got a bone marrow transplant that
Mm.
ultimately failed. And at that point, there was nothing left they could do. He had leukemia.
Oh
And
my.
by this point, we were probably 2 years out of college, 2 or 3. I
Hmm.
think we were 25 when he died. And so while he was ill, and especially after he died, I was doing a lot of wrestling with my faith and what I
Hmm.
understood church to be, who I understood God to be, the classic why do bad things happen to good people
Yeah.
kind of
Yes.
questions. And
Yes.
what I found was the tradition I grew up in, at least where I was at the time. I don't want to paint an entire denomination by one brush, but for me, particularly in this particular setting, I found that they didn't address the grief and the tragedy and my experience of faith up until Lee's death and his illness and his death had been that faith sort of meant being always happy, being always
Hmm.
um, to have faith meant you were always confident, you didn't have doubts, and you always had peace or joy in the midst of struggle. And so that's easy when things are going well, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
but as soon
Sure.
as it's not going well, that doesn't work anymore. And I was looking for church to be a place where I could wrestle with my questions and my
Sure.
grief and the thing that I wouldn't tell anyone out loud at the time because it felt so wrong was that I was pretty angry at God for how that turned out. But I
Yep.
didn't feel like I was allowed to feel that. So I certainly didn't say it out loud. Um, so to circle all the way back to how I got to the Episcopal Church and why I stayed, a lot of it had to do with the liturgy
Mm.
and the patterns that the church follows, both in a service and around the whole year. So the church year, at least in how liturgical church would celebrate it, you would have Advent and Lent as sort of more solemn times of year, and Good Friday and Ash Wednesday, and these moments built in where we're talking about death, we're talking about um, sadness, about the things in our story that we say we believe that are tragic.
Hmm.
Um, and and that's worked into the worship. And so if we can't do it in worship, we certainly can't do it outside of worship.
Yeah.
So um, I just appreciated so much how the Episcopal Church gave me space, is one of several traditions that sort of mapped that grief in the story that they were telling
Mm.
every Sunday, and there was room for it. And in my conversations with people, when I was first, went to my first Episcopal church here in Washington, there was room for having questions, and we
Hmm.
didn't all have to agree on the answer to those
Yeah.
questions. And oftentimes we would conclude together we didn't know the answer to those questions.
Right.
And you
And
would
that's a
never
great,
do that as a
and
Baptist, right?
right. You got to be certain, you got to be
Yeah,
certain.
you gotta be
Yes.
sure.
A sure and rock steady faith, which, for some people that's okay. I mean, that's their thing. That's not to say anything negative about it because that's their experience. But it sounds like you and I had a very similar experience
Mhm.
in that the Episcopal Church twice in my life gave me space where doubt and uncertainty was not something to be scorned.
Yeah.
It was something to
Yeah, it was
say,
sort of normalized.
yeah, yeah. I had a theology professor that once said that, or maybe I read it because they write more than they. Anyway, we'll leave that there. But maybe I read this, but the antithesis to faith is not certainty,
Mhm. No.
or the opposite of faith is not certainty, or wait a minute, the opposite of faith is not what, Well, I just confused that completely. The bottom line is I'm getting to is that doubt is okay. That
Yeah.
the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite, I think, the antithesis to faith, or the is actually absolute, complete certainty that there's no room for doubt. And it's no
Yeah.
longer faith at that point; it's science, or it's faith. Is you got to have
Yeah.
some doubt to actually put your trust in things that are not seen. Is that am
Yes.
I on the right track?
That makes total sense to me.
Okay, okay. Well, yeah, because we're Episcopalians, but
Exactly.
I screwed that all up. That's what I love about doing this podcast is, it's okay to kind of do that. But yeah, I mean, and as I say that to people that grew up in traditions like ours, and they think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean that doubt is okay? So anyway, well, we went down that bunny trail really well. So let's so
Yeah.
yeah, remember I told you that. And so now let's segue to something else. No, no, but thank you for that. That's wonderful that you were able to share that you found a tradition that gave you space at a time where you needed that. And I guess my question is so you go from this time of finding your personal faith safe, I'll say safe space. Is that okay to say? I mean that
Yeah.
yeah, because I mean it's been a safe space for me. But when did you start sensing that God was calling you to be a priest?
Hell, I felt called to some sort of ministry
Hmm.
since almost as long as I can remember. But
Wow.
my my language around it changed, right? So
Yeah.
as a little girl, I didn't feel called to be a parish priest, right? Because that wasn't my language at the time, and I
Right.
never
Right.
saw a woman do that.
Right.
That wasn't a thing women did. Um, but I still felt very much called to something, and it would sort of change as I got older. You know, as a little
Yeah.
girl, I thought I want to be a missionary because all the other little girls pray for the missionaries on their birthdays. That stood out to me. And
Yeah.
then so I got a little older and I thought, well, maybe I'm going to be a youth minister because I loved youth group so much.
Mhm.
And I began to be more practical as I got older and thought, well, that's not going to make any money. I better get an actual career. And so then I became a teacher. Um, and I mostly because I had a teacher who was very deeply meaningful for me, and I wanted to be her for others, you know, to do what she
Mhm.
did for me for other students. And but even as I was starting that career, you know, starting my student teaching, I was already sort of looking up seminaries because I
Wow.
felt this draw to learn more, and I thought I got to figure out what this means. I had periods of my life where I thought, well, that must whatever my calling is going to be, it probably has nothing to do with the church. You know, especially during periods of time where I felt sort of frustrated with the church. I was like, well, I can have a calling that doesn't have to do with that. You know,
Right.
I'll work for somebody else and it'll still be a calling. Um, but I job shadowed my pastor when I was a kid, probably about junior high or something.
Yeah.
And uh, you know, I did that, but did no one ever asked me, "Do you want to be a pastor?" Because that wasn't a thing girls did.
Not in
Um,
that not in the tradition we grew up in, right?
yeah, not in the
Yeah.
tradition we grew up in.
Mm-mm.
And
No.
so, you know, I moved up here. I did my denominational exploring. I moved to Washington, started going to an Episcopal church. The first church I went to, the priest was a woman.
Oh,
And
wow.
day one, I introduced myself on that first Sunday I showed up. It was January 2015, I think. And told everybody I was in seminary. I sent myself to seminary because I wasn't Episcopalian at the time, so I did
Right.
it all
Right.
out of order. So
That is so
I
cool though.
told everybody I'm a seminary student, and so the priest introduced me to everybody. This is Hillary. She's new. She's a seminary student. And on the way out the door, people were shaking my hand who I had never met before till this very day. And they said, "Oh, so do you want to be a priest?" And I was like, what? Was that me?
Wow.
Like, that's not a thing. It blew my mind that something that no one ever asked me for 20 plus years was a no-brainer for other people when they were just
Yeah.
meeting me. They're just curious. And so, but for a long time, I thought I always felt called, but to what? And that was the
Right.
journey to figure out to what.
It's amazing because I think that that's the way the Spirit works in our lives. You were prepared a long time ago to be a priest. I've, I've only met you, but you were prepared a long time ago. But you needed people to come into your life to actually affirm it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we
Yeah.
use this formal. I mean, I was over the discernment process and the ordination process in the diocese on behalf of the bishop in Oklahoma. I
Yeah.
know the formalities of it, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
also know deeper, richer workings of discernment in community and in your own spirit and your own
Mhm.
journey that brings you to that. So that's really cool that someone said to you, "Oh, are you going to be a priest?"
Yeah. They didn't think anything about it. Like this was so, they probably have no idea that that moment was so formative for me. It just
Yeah,
blew my mind.
yeah. Sometimes the most interesting calls and the most interesting ministry vocations post ordination are the ones where the community says to someone, because we think you have a call, and you never mention
Yeah.
it.
And absolutely. And the mixed messages I got sort of growing up Baptist were, yeah, we do. We think you're a leader and we want you to,
Mhm.
help volunteer on these adult teams and we want you to help teach the other students and I did all these leadership roles and I would do, I'd pray and worship or whatever. And but there was always a bar. You can
Mhm.
go up to here, but no further.
Yeah. So you're in seminary. At what point? Because we have a very formalized ordination process. At what point, and what was the catalyst for moving from that affirmation at the doorstep to, yeah, we think you need to make some applications, put some applications in.
Yeah, so I I started at McAfee School of Theology in Atlanta, which was a cooperative Baptist school, then
Hmm.
ended up moving to Washington because my spouse was in the Navy at the time. And so then I transferred to the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, um, which is where I finished my MDiv. And I was 2 years already into the program by the time I entered our like you mentioned our formal Episcopal discernment process. So our bishop at the time said, "Well, I'm not going to make you start over at an Episcopal church when you or an Episcopal seminary. So finish your degree here, and then we'll have you do some additional online classes through one of the Episcopal seminaries, which was CDSP. Eventually, is where I took some online classes.
Nice.
And throughout that whole process, I went in very open-minded. It's like which is probably that was probably to my advantage because it probably made the experience better. I just was not holding tight to a particular outcome because I thought at the time, as much as my mentors and the people in, helping me discern were telling me, we think we see a priest in you. I was thinking, well, yeah, maybe, but or maybe not. Maybe I'm going to be a deacon, or maybe I'm going to be a layperson because I was so focused on being a hospital chaplain that I knew
Yeah.
I didn't have to get ordained to do that role.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but as I continued through, I felt this draw to the sacraments and liturgy and teaching and sort of these priestly things that's,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
by the end of it, I felt like I think I am called to be a priest, but it might not always be in a traditional sense. And uh, when I did my first, after I got ordained, I did a half-time, 20 hours a week curacy at St. Luke's in Seattle, and then kept my hospital job. So I was working 30 hours a week at the hospital as a chaplain.
Hmm.
This is in 2020, mind you.
Right in the middle of
So it's
COVID. Yes.
complete chaos.
Right.
And 20 hours a week at the church. So that's 50 hours a week. And
Oh
I
my
live in
gosh.
Bremerton. Seattle's on the other side of the water. So I I jumped in both feet in the water.
Oh, so I'm gonna pause you for a second because I want to just kind of tie a couple things together. So,
Yeah.
all right. So I'm gonna put a placeholder here at ordination, and so now and being ordained because I think that's where we're at. But I want to go back a second. Am I right that you were a teacher for a while?
Mm. Yes.
So this is right after college.
Yeah. Right after
I'm gonna,
college.
I'm gonna put my placeholder down here for now. So
Yes.
because I want to come back to because I think it connects. So you started out right out of college, not in a religious vocation. You were teaching. What
Yeah.
grades were you teaching? I won't spend a whole lot of time there because I want to come back to to this, but talk a little
Mm.
bit about. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how that because that had to have led you a little bit towards this because pastor, priest, and
Oh
teacher
gosh.
teach. That's what.
Absolutely. My right after college, I started teaching as a public school English teacher. I was at one school for 1 year and then the second school for 2 years. And this is kind of in the low country of South Carolina. Um, Mostly I taught 10th grade, ninth, 10th, and 12th with the
Mhm.
occasional 11th graders in there. But um, so, and generally it was sort of your, some of my students were remedial English classes, some were sort of your college prep kind of classes. Um, but English literature was in there, and then, that all that fun stuff. I was such
Yeah,
a writing nerd. I loved reading and writing from childhood on that, it was a no-brainer. I thought, I want to
great,
teach other students about how to love these things.
great groundwork training to be Episcopal priest.
Yeah, it actually was a huge help to me
What?
because earlier we talked about how we were raised in this tradition to read the Bible very
Mhm.
literally.
Mhm.
But I spent all these years in college getting trained in literary theory and literary
Yes.
interpretation and critical reading of things. And so it actually was not that hard of a leap in seminary to jump to, oh, of course, when I read the Bible, I'm going to think about authorship and historical context and
Right.
genre and redaction. And I'm going to think about all these things and it'll give me a deeper picture. So,
Mhm.
of course, my time as an English teacher, not only in that sense, but in the teaching sense, that was hugely helpful for me in moving on. And I had no idea when I was a teacher that I'd eventually be Episcopal priest. I probably would have laughed if somebody told me that. No, but
I think a
it
lot of
was
us would
it
have.
was hugely beneficial to me.
Yeah.
Like it made things so much easier.
Well, and I can only imagine too the I'll use the term pastoral or pastoral the way we use it, but to be with young people in the most challenging times of their lives as
Yeah.
someone that they can rely on and trust,
Mhm.
and in a way, without you knowing it, or maybe you did know it, but you may not have used that language around, but you were actually pastoring and loving and caring for young people in the most difficult times of their lives. Also, good groundwork to be in school.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
actually, yes, and I did, even though teachers are sort of professional talkers.
Right.
You also you do a lot of listening too, because that's how you
Yeah.
figure out how to reach the students and who's struggling with what and who's going through whatever else at home that is preventing them from being able to hear what you're teaching.
Your story is so cool, and I see threads of my own little snippets of little chapters and sentences and things that we cross over. And the same thing when I was talking to other friends that we both have.
Mhm.
But I honestly, I don't think God's the grand muppeteer, puppeteer that's, kind of stringing us along to do the things that,
Yeah.
that's not God. I don't think that's the God of of the tradition that but I do believe that each of us are gifted and people come into our lives at different
Yeah.
times that
Mhm.
the stirrings that are in us from whatever become ignited by the
Yeah.
connections of these people.
Mhm.
Um, for instance, as a side note, the first parish I was a part of had a woman priest, and that was such a wonderful experience for me. She sponsored me to seminary, and it was so wonderful to have that, because I same tradition you came out of. I didn't,
Yeah.
but
You see women do that.
there was someone in the church that came up to me one time, and she was one of them. And then there was another one that said, "Have you ever felt called to ordained ministry?" And my first answer was probably like yours, no.
Me? You know, who are you talking to?
But I was lying.
Yes.
So anyway, all right, come back. Okay, I've got the benchmark right here. Here's the marker.
Uh-huh.
We're back to ordained ministry. You've been ordained now, right? During COVID.
Mhm.
And you
Yeah.
said your first call, you were doing a curacy. We call that in the Episcopal Church a 2-year training program,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah. 2 years. And that
management
was
training.
sort of it was great. I mean, I sort of equivalent, it's sort of the equivalent of being a student teacher priest, right?
Yes,
Because you're
yes,
learning from another priest. You have the qualifications at this point, but you're still going to learn from someone who's more experienced and sort of do the on the job training. And it was wonderful I loved it. Um, and that was at that point was sort of exploring the idea of being bivocational. I'm going to
yeah,
do my hospital thing, my hospital ministry, and I'm going to be a parish priest. And I'm going to figure out if these two can happen at the same time, and if I can be bivocational in that
yeah.
sense, um, which has its particular challenges. But at the time, the biggest challenge was that we were going through a worldwide health crisis.
Right. And you were in the middle of it, trying to be a caregiver
Yeah.
and a supporter of people that were losing. And that's a good segue to my next
Yeah.
the next thing is you were serving as a hospice chaplain in downtown Seattle, I can only imagine, in the middle of the
Yeah.
pandemic. And this was one of the early major areas where the pandemic was like taking footholds,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Seattle.
Yeah, we had the dubious honor of the first known case of COVID in America. Certainly, we're now thinking it was already here,
Yeah.
but Seattle, the greater Seattle area, had the first positive known infection and the first outbreak. So we were the first epicenter of
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I can only imagine, when I moved to Oklahoma, I lost my administrative assistant, who was going to retire in December when I started on staff, wound up in the hospital with COVID and did not come out
Mm.
before she could fully retire. And that's one
Mm.
story of millions of people that we lost during that time. I mean, you must have witnessed fear and hope and despair. And
Yeah.
what was that like? And how did you take care of yourself during all that?
What was it like? It's as bad as you can picture, it was worse.
Yeah.
Um even though Seattle, we had, again, being one of the first epicenters, we weren't the largest, right?
Mm,
So LA and New York, being more densely populated, had even more horrific outbreaks than we did.
mhm,
Um, but we had some of the similar things, right? Running out of space in the morgue.
mhm.
We were planning in well before the public had any idea. Our hospital was planning, what do we do if we run out of ventilators? How do
Yeah.
we decide who gets one and who doesn't if we
Right.
only have so many? And
Yeah.
most of the public in America at that time was still thinking it's not gonna get here, it's gonna stay on other places in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything you could picture, right? The highs and lows of all kinds of human experiences of grief and sadness and fear, anxiety, everything changed all the time because we were constantly learning new information and things were changing all the time. And uh, we saw the flip side of humanity too, right? I mean, the people I worked with, the nurses and physicians and providers, respiratory therapists, I mean, all those people, I could name them all, I could, but um, you know, it became, the healthcare hero sort of became this thing people would put on signs or whatever, but it was a real thing too that I witnessed, see people. Imagine, firefighters running towards the burning building.
Yeah.
That's what we were doing.
Yeah.
We were running towards the danger and the suffering and the grief. And a chaplain's role is very unique in that setting too, because while my colleagues are focused on a person's physical well-being and their symptoms and managing pain and managing in breathing, all that, I'm focused on where's the emotional spiritual suffering
Yeah.
and running towards it, right? And
Yeah.
so um
And that's often
it
harder.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I,
And a lot of my colleagues, I think, were really grateful that chaplains were around because
yeah.
they didn't have time. They wanted to be there for their families and for the patients, but they were so overwhelmed with the number of patients that they just couldn't.
Right.
And so, where I could,
Hmm.
could do that.
You're gonna, and I noticed in the information we shared, are you in the process of writing a memoir, or is that your plan? You're in the process of,
Yeah, so I'm working with To Home Center Publishing.
mhm.
It's almost done.
Oh, wonderful.
I have a final draft with a whole bunch of edits from my copy editor that I'm actually hoping to turn in this weekend to Home Center Publishing.
Oh my goodness.
Um, yeah, so and it covers that time, January 2024 or January 2020 through January 2024, because
Wow.
it's the time period right before the pandemic really hit home in America. I went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and so I kind of start with that, and then go through the 4 years up until January of 2024. Um, because that's when I did the celebration of new ministry at my current church. And so it
Yeah.
marks that arc of getting through hospital work in the pandemic.
That's a good segue. So
I'm
anyway,
here for you.
I know, I appreciate you, man. I'm telling you, we're gonna do part B.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the memoir, when it comes out and it's published, please make sure that you share links and stuff with me so I can make sure that gets out there.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah. Happy to.
my listeners can, yeah, I can't wait to read it too. So talking about parish ministry, take a couple of minutes here. Tell us a little bit about, how did you make this? Okay, first off, you were doing hospital chaplaincy. I assume you thought you were going to do that till you hit
Yeah.
the church pension group retirement age and you
Yeah.
go off into the sunset, but that's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
You're serving a
Oh,
parish where? Where are you serving?
I'm in Silverdale, Washington. So it's sort of the burbs across the water from Seattle.
Nice. So what led you to that? And I know, I mean, trust me, I did diocesan work more than I did parish ministry, but I
Yeah.
love parish ministry. What led you to that?
So as you can imagine, being a hospital chaplain is hard in a normal time in the world.
Hmm.
And it is especially hard during worldwide health crisis. And so, um, like many of my colleagues, I went through trauma, depression, all kinds of, when you see people suffer, it's almost as bad on your brain as suffering it yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, that's what I talk about a lot in the book is helpers needing help.
Yes.
And uh, so, but that's not to say I didn't love my job. It was just a very hard thing to explain to people that you love being a hospital chaplain. But I did.
Yeah.
So I wasn't originally looking to leave. January 2023 came around and I thought, I'm not in the best place I could be physically and
Hmm.
emotionally.
Hmm.
What is one change I could make that would have the biggest impact on my life for the better
Hmm.
and to help me
Yeah.
spiritually, physically, emotionally be more healthy?
Right.
And the decision I came to was I think I should stop commuting to Seattle. I think I should work closer to where I live because from
Ah,
door to door, that commute involves ferries and buses and Ubers, and it can take up to 2 hours
oh my
one way.
goodness. Oh my
So,
gosh.
I mean, most days, because I would take the fast ferry and then Swedish would, my hospital would pay for me to take an Uber or whatever. And it usually took only about an hour, but it's an hour that involves like your car, a ferry, someone else's
Mhm.
car, or a bus. And so
Yeah.
it's this involved commute. And so that made my 10-hour shift days 12 to 14 hours long.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so I thought to myself, the if I could get rid of that long commute, I bet that would have the biggest impact. And that was the hard choice for me to make because I loved my hospital. I loved my team. I loved my co-chaplain. I loved them and I loved that work. And it felt so important. And
Hmm.
I felt proud that I had done this very hard work. And so originally I was looking for a chaplain job on the other side of the water.
Right, right.
I thought maybe I'll do hospice or find, a smaller hospital, but there were no jobs to be found.
Oh
And
wow. Yeah.
uh, so at that point I thought, all right, it's time to throw the spaghetti at the wall. And um, because I loved my curacy at St. Luke's so much, and I had a fantastic mentor in the Reverend Canon Britt Olson, who's their vicar at she's still there. I thought to myself, maybe I should see if any churches in my neighborhood are hiring, and because
There
the
you
whole
go.
goal was to work closer to home.
Right, right.
And the church where I'm at now, I actually supplied it 3 Sundays in a row in January of 2023 when I was going through this, you know, sort of New Year's thinking
Mhm.
about what changes can I make. And so I supplied with them 3 Sundays in a row while their current interim had been on a pilgrimage in the Holy Land. And so every Sunday of those 3 Sundays, people on their way out the door would say, we're looking for a priest, right? And I would say, oh, yeah, good luck. Good luck finding that priest. I'm praying for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Isn't
So,
it funny? Isn't it funny? My theology professor used to say, you really need to pay very much attention to what people say to you at the door as they're going home because it's really, really impactful. Listen carefully. That's happened to you twice if you're telling me the truth.
so at the time, I thought, good luck. So, uh, but months went along, and I'm talking to the canons of the ordinary and applying to churches, and just at that time too, because I loved my job at the hospital so much, I wasn't again like married to an outcome.
Yeah,
I'll apply to some of these churches that are near me, and let's just see what happens.
sure.
If we're not the right fit for each other, there's no tragedy. I have a job that I love. So, uh, but it so happened that, the match was made.
I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh. One of these that offline, I'll tell you about an experience I had similar to that. And anyway, that's really cool. So now you're in this parish, loving life, happy, it sounds like. Are you
Yeah.
still doing chaplaincy or not at all? You're not doing chaplaincy right now.
So yes and no, I would say, a lot of the skills you use in chaplaincy, you still use in the church, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's still people who get sick, people die, or people who go
Mhm.
through crises in their families. I mean, so in that sense, I'm still a chaplain. But unlike being in the hospital, these are people I stay with instead of
Mhm.
people I see once or twice and never again, in their story for the blink of an eye. Here at church, we're telling the same story together. And so,
Yeah.
um, and I am currently in the process of trying to onboard as a volunteer chaplain with the local fire rescue department.
Nice. Nice.
So um, you can take the girl out of the hospital, but you can't
But
take
you
the
can't take
chaplain
the
out of
hot.
the girl.
just so you know, I've been a Civil Air Patrol chaplain. I don't know if you're familiar with Civil Air Patrol, it's the Air Force Auxiliary, but I've been a chaplain with them. I actually served on national staff as the deputy chief of chaplains uh,
Wow.
since 2015 for 10 years. And I
I love
know
that.
you can't take the chaplain out of,
You can't do it.
you just can't do it. And you're right. There is so much crossover into that chaplaincy work that comes into the parish. Yeah.
Yeah. And the things
I
that are different. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the things that are different in a good way are that while people may have the same sort of crises in a church as you saw in hospitals, the percentage is much lower
Yeah.
and they're spread out, you
Yeah.
know, hopefully. Sometimes most,
Yeah.
many communities go through a period of time where there's a lot of tragedy happen all at once, but
Right.
most
Right.
of the time it's more spread out when you're not in the midst of somebody's tragedy or crisis. The problems at a church are often a lot lower stake and that they're not life and death. So,
Vestry meetings, which vestry is like the church
yeah,
council for my non-Episcopal listeners.
you got meetings, you got, figuring out communication things is often,
Yeah.
that's so much of it. It's like helping people understand each other, talk to each other and understand. And, understanding is so much of it. But so my initial couple months there were multiple floods in the building.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we had a big freeze in January of
Right.
2024,
Right.
and a sprinkler pipe burst and flooded
Oh no.
2/3 of the building.
Oh my gosh.
Uh, and one of my parishioners, I don't remember who it was, but one of them came up to me and said, after mopping and talking to church insurance and trying to do all that stuff, it was in the sacristy closet, by the way. So all the linens,
Oh,
that's where the
so
pipe burst.
so the sacristy for our non-Episcopal listeners is a fancy name we Episcopalians call the closet for the altar linens and vestments, which is our clothing that we wear into blah blah blah. Okay, so it's a closet. It's a fancy
Yeah,
closet, a holy closet.
fancy.
Go
It's
ahead.
the holy closet.
It's the holy closet.
So that's where the flood started. And so
Oh
a
my
lot of our
gosh.
linens got soaked, and a lot of them came clean. But anyway, all that to say, one of my parishioners came up to me, and this is only 3 months into this job, and one of them came up to me and said, so Hillary, would you have said yes to this job if you had known all this was going to happen? Like, you're not going to leave, are you?
Oh yes. I've heard yes.
You're not going to leave, are you? Because again, this was like flood number three, and that
Right.
was the worst one. The other
Oh
two were
my
smaller.
Lord.
But and at the time I remember just kind of laughing to myself, and they were serious, so I had to pull myself back and be like, no, they're asking me a serious question, they're sincerely worried, I can't just laugh. And I said, why would you think that? Of course I'm not going to leave. This is, we can handle this, no one
Yeah.
died.
And you're going back to your chaplaincy day going, this is nothing.
This is nothing, this is
It's not.
fine,
It's a water.
we can
It's a
handle
water
this,
bath.
just get them off.
Get a mop and clean it up. Let's go. Oh
We
my
can do
gosh.
this, this is so much, we can manage this together, right? Like, this is not life and death. It doesn't mean it's not important, but because I was coming out of this hospital setting in the midst of a crisis,
Yeah.
my barometer for emergency was different.
Right. And you know what? That's what a gift you are to a congregation to give them. I'm assuming a very calming presence in the midst of their crisis, but also honoring the fact that it is their crisis,
Yeah,
but it's not
yeah.
the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world. I know you're very worried about this, and I'm here to be in that with you. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, no one died. This is fine. We can handle this.
It's all
We can
good.
handle this.
You know,
So, yeah,
I think about, just our conversation and, your journey has been one of lots of change, like
yeah.
all of us, but you had some pretty big
Mhm.
turns. You went from Southern Baptist to Episcopalian. You went from being a teacher to being a chaplain in the midst of COVID. You went from chaplain to being a parish priest. You're now going to be a fire department volunteer chaplain, which is really cool, by the way. I just honor you for that. Way to go. Way to go. So change is a part of who you are. If
Mhm.
how do you encourage other people to be open to change?
I guess I would say to people, um, not to be cliche, but sometimes the cliches are real, right? So a lot of times we're on the face of, on the precipice of a big change. And many of us, our instinct is to cling to what we know and what feels safe and stable. And we know how to do these things. So, or we know the setting we're in, even if it's a stressful one. So a change feels sometimes even more scary than what you're in. I know leaving my teaching job was potentially the scariest thing I ever did because I had no idea, you know, where that was going to go, if anywhere. And so what I would tell people, I think, is yes, definitely ponder what are the risks if you do this thing, right? Because I certainly did. I was thinking about, okay, if I leave this very stable, respectable career as a high school teacher, maybe nothing, maybe I'm going to end up living with my parents again, so who knows? But which I did for a summer, by the way.
That's okay.
But
That's all good. That's all good.
it was great. And so, but yeah, so okay, yes, certainly this is biblical too. Count the cost, right? Yeah,
Count the cost. Yeah.
measure what it's gonna cost you. Consider the risks of what am I what could I lose if I do this? Certainly ask yourself that. But don't forget to also ask, what am I gonna miss out on if I don't?
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I gonna
Yeah.
what potential am I gonna never see if I don't do this? Like, what do I risk if I don't? Is the alternative the other side of that coin? You got to ask both questions.
I'm jotting that down. I know that personally. We'll talk offline sometime. Uh,
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'd love to. Yeah. I've kind of gotten my questions out of order, but I want to come back to that again and ask it in a different way. But no, you gave me that's good. I wrote down something a minute ago that you said that I think is very important when it comes to change, and I'll bring it back up again. Um, when you were thinking about making a change from chaplaincy to something else, you didn't. Two things I heard. One is I heard that there was not a something else yet.
Yeah.
That was risky. The other thing I heard is you didn't go out and say, I'm going to go find my next thing right away. I need to make one change that is very impactful. And that was to get rid of the commute.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the small change is where you actually open the door for the bigger changes that's led you to where you are right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. In my head, I thought the the big change was going to be leaving the big inpatient downtown hospital to do, neighborhood hospice maybe, but it was
Mm-hmm.
going to be still familiar-ish, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. What I'm going to say that because I want to, there's a segue to the last question there, because it deals with people in kind of in a different, my stage of life. And I'll come back to that. So I wish we could keep talking, but I know you got things to do. But I've got a real quick. This has been wonderful. I do something at the end as we're going through this. I cannot wait to get your book and promote it. Is what little I can do for you, but I can't wait to read it and then ask folks that watch the podcast to read it too. And I would love to have a conversation with you again whenever your next change comes, whatever that might be, because
Yeah,
that we all know that
absolutely.
that's coming. So I like to shift gears for some fun for just a minute and do the lightning round because our time's kind of coming to its end. So I've got
Okay.
some real
Lightning round. Feel like
quick.
Jeopardy.
It is. It's yeah. So you got to figure out. You got to ask the question for the answer. I'm kidding. So there's like 4 or 5 questions. I'll ask a couple of them. Here's the first one. Other than the Bible that you've memorized from front cover to back as a good Southern Baptist, former. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The only scripture I ever memorized was Jesus wept. Moving on. I'm kidding. What is a book or a quote that has shaped your spiritual life?
Gosh, there's so many, but since this is a lightning round, um, it's just as far as impact, I would say A New Kind of Christian by Brian McLaren.
Yes.
That was hugely impactful on me.
Yes. Great book. Yep. Thank you for that.
You ask an English teacher about books, like
I know we could talk all night. That's a whole nother podcast
so
episode.
many.
But I'm glad to see that you're a Brian McLaren fan, because that had a yes. Okay. We will talk again. What's your favorite hobby?
So I love to read fiction, genre, fun, fantasy, silly, romantic fiction, the non-serious stuff that's not on these shelf. The shelf is
You
the
wouldn't have.
serious
Oh,
stuff.
okay. I got you. I got you. I don't see him on the office bookshelf there, but
Yeah, these are the serious church books, theology and stuff.
yes.
But I love to read fun stuff, and I also love to bake.
Oh, do you really? How cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. All right. Is there a particular moment in ministry that you're especially proud of?
Moment. Moments are hard. There's probably a countless number of moments that I could pull from both in church and in the hospital that I feel proud of. But uh, instead, I think I'll say I am really proud of having been a chaplain in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, it was the hardest thing I ever did. And those were certainly some of the worst days of my life.
Mm.
But I'm so proud that I did it.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah. I'm honored to know you for what you've done and how you served others during that time.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Yeah. Um, without naming the first and last name, but you can name the first name. And be brief, please. I'm honoring your time. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. A mentor or teacher that changed your life, and maybe a little bit of
Oh.
why.
So one of the other many things I did was work at a church summer camp, and I had a mentor there who was sort of my Gandalf figure on the way to figuring out how to be a progressive Christian. And if he ever hears this, he'll be delighted by that. Loves Lord. But so when I was asking him for books about, he's the one that suggested um, uh, A New Kind of Christian by Brian McLaren. And he told me, are you sure you want to read these books? Because once you go down this road, you can't
Yes.
turn around. You
Yep.
can't undo it. And I said, I think I need I think I'm already halfway down the path, so I might as well get a flashlight. So just tell me the books to read, and I'll read them. And so that was again huge moment,
Yeah.
very impactful for me. But I've had so many since then, Britt, Ariane, so many, so many.
My hope in life, and I know that I've been able to do that both in aviation and as a priest, is that at some point, oh, makes you want to cry. At some point in my life, somebody look back and say, this guy named Eric said
Yeah,
this to me once, and it changed my life.
yeah,
I want to, and I know
mm,
it's happened, but I want to be able to do that. I
yeah,
think that's where we can all find joy,
yeah.
if we can help people discover their true calling in life, whatever it might be.
Mhm,
Mm.
mhm.
Wow, you go. Thank you for being with me. All right, so here's the last question. This is the one that kind of ends our time together, if you're okay with that. So I call this podcast Never Too Late, Stories of Reinvention, because I've been through a period of reinvention myself, and I'm still on that journey. And you know what? I don't think it ever ends. hopefully we never arrive. But so you're sitting with someone, a parishioner or a colleague that's in the 50, 60s, maybe even 70, 80 range, but they're sitting there as across from you over coffee at Starbucks or a great Seattle coffee shop that's not Starbucks, because that's weird. Anyway, and they say to you, I'm thinking about making this major change in my life. It's a huge risk for me.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about before, but I want to rephrase it in the context of someone we're talking about they've already got their 401k. They've still got they've spent years in a career, blah, blah, blah. And now they're asking you, I'm getting ready to make this major crazy change. What do you say to them? That's the question. They ask you, what do you think? What do you say to them?
I'll say it's never too late to be brave, so it's never too late to
Wow.
try. You know, whatever the outcome is, exploring is something that takes courage, and it's never too late to find your courage. And sometimes the answer is, I'm going to explore, but stay where I am. You don't ever know what the answer is going to be, but to let yourself dream is also a brave thing to do.
Yeah. I wrote down a few of those things. I like the one, I'll rephrase a little bit, paraphrasing. Exploration takes courage.
Yeah.
The more people I talk to on this podcast about life change and how they would encourage people, the thing that you just said and said it differently in a very beautiful way is that we can't let fear keep us from chasing the things that actually gives us joy, peace, affirmation, fulfillment, and hopefully changing people's lives. I love what you said. Exploration takes courage, and let yourself dream. Wow. Hillary, my gosh, I know you got things to do. You're a very busy parish priest, but I am so grateful to have the opportunity to meet you. I have enjoyed sharing our Baptist backgrounds.
So many stories can be told.
Oh my goodness, we got to talk again, and our mutual love of Brian McLaren's A New Kind of Christian, that was impactful for me. I just want to thank you, Hillary, for your story, your courage, and your ministry, and especially for the work you're doing as a parish priest. I know it's difficult, but also being a chaplain in the midst of one of the worst pandemics we've ever experienced. And I know it was hard, but man, I'm sure you changed so many lives. I want to include in the show notes links to your church's website. If you have online sermons, if you can just send that to me after we get finished, I want to put that out there. And if you have a blog or anything, I want to make sure people get a chance to connect with you and go visit her church, for goodness sakes, and support her ministry and the work of her wonderful community that I'm sure she's a part of. Hillary, thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
And dear listeners, thank you for tuning in once again for another episode of Never Too Late, Stories of Reinvention, where every 2 weeks I try to invite a new guest to come in and share their story of rediscovering who they're being transformed to be, and the changes that they've gone through, and the courage and strength that it's taken to do that. And hopefully in the midst of all that, it inspires you to go out there and do it. The podcast is featured on Spotify. We're on iHeart. We're on Amazon. We're on Apple Podcasts. And we also are featured on YouTube. So if you get a chance, please tune in, subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe. That way you get notifications of each of the new episodes coming out. Remember that, as Hillary said, that exploration takes courage, and courage helps you to go out and chase your dreams. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.